Picture yourself for a moment. Um, Far from land, just completely detached from the safety of the world that you know.
Right. Out in the middle of the nowhere.
Exactly. It's the late 1940s. You are navigating the dense, sweltering, just oppressive heat of the Straits of Malacca.
Yeah, that heat is, I mean, it's the kind of heat that warps the horizon. It makes the
Right.
air feel thick and like wet in your lungs.
It really does. And the ocean around you is vast and it's heavy and entirely unforgiving. You're on a merchant vessel, and the relentless rhythmic drone of your ship's engines is pretty much the only thing tethering you to sanity in this absolute isolation.
And then, out of nowhere,
Yeah, the crackle of a radio just violently breaks the silence in the communications room.
it's a sound that really cuts through the white noise of a ship at sea. You get that sharp, sudden static followed by the mechanical tapping of Morse code. But any seasoned radio operator listening in 1947 would know immediately this wasn't just like a routine position check.
Right, because the cadence is completely wrong.
Exactly. It's frantic, it's disjointed.
You have this message bleeding through the static, and it reads, quote, "S.O.S. from Ourang Medan. We float. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge, probably whole of crew dead."
Just horrifying.
And then there's this terrifying pause. Just a series of incoherent dots and dashes. I mean, you can almost see the operator on the other end struggling, like their hand is slipping from the telegraph key.
Yeah, losing consciousness or just panicking.
Right. And then the final transmission. Just 2 words tapping out into the blind void of the Pacific. "I die."
God. I mean, you are receiving a transmission from a ghost ship being born in real time. It is the absolute definition of a maritime nightmare.
It really is.
Because out in the open ocean, the radio is your only lifeline, right?
Yeah.
Hearing the person on the other end narrate their own death and the death of their entire crew, it just leaves you staring out at the water knowing something unimaginably lethal is drifting out there in the dark.
And the ghost ship broadcasting that death rattle was the SS Ourang Medan, which, translated from Malay, the name roughly means Man of Medan, with Medan being the largest city on the Indonesian island of Sumatra.
Right.
And today, for this deep dive, we are going completely off the map. We're going to dig through classified military documents, dusty newspaper archives, post-war naval logs, and the cold, hard chemistry of nerve agents to figure out what killed that crew.
Because our mission here is really to reconstruct an event where the primary crime scene quite literally vanished into the abyss.
Yeah, which makes it so much harder.
So much harder. We are dealing with early newspaper clippings that honestly blur the line between journalism and pulp fiction, plus official maritime accounts that contradict each other, and decades of scientific investigations trying to explain a mass death with literally no visible cause.
So if you're listening to this, I want you to imagine stepping into the boots of a 1940s sailor. You've just heard that distress call over the wire. You're responding to the SOS. Your ship is cutting through the dark water, pulling up alongside a drifting vessel.
And you don't know it yet, but you are about to board a floating graveyard.
To understand the sheer visceral terror of this, we really have to start with the most detailed, most prominent historical account of this disaster. Let's talk about the timeline.
Yeah, so the timeline for this primary account sits right on the edge of the post-war era. We're talking between June 1947 and early February 1948. The global shipping lanes are still recovering from World War II, so they're heavily trafficked, but it's chaotic.
Right, lots of movement.
Exactly. And 2 American vessels are navigating the Straits of Malacca, which is that narrow stretch of water between the Malay Peninsula and the Indonesian island of Sumatra. One is the city of Baltimore, and the other is the Silver Star.
And the Silver Star is the one that actually manages to triangulate that horrifying radio signal. And, let's think of the mechanics of maritime communication for a second. Standard distress calls, even back in the 1940s, they have a protocol.
Right. They give coordinates. They state the nature of the emergency, like we are taking on water, or we have an engine fire, or we struck a mine. They're panicked, sure, but they are practical.
Exactly. But this message is purely observational horror. Just, we float, everyone is dead. There's no request for a specific type of help because the sender already knows it's far too late.
Yeah, the sender isn't asking for rescue. They are leaving a warning.
Wow. That's a chilling way to put it.
And when the Silver Star finally locates the Ourang Medan, the visual reality completely contradicts the panic of the radio message. The Ourang Medan is a Dutch merchant ship, and from the outside, it looks perfectly fine.
Like no damage at all?
None. There is no smoke billowing from the lower decks. There is no severe list to port or starboard indicating it's taking on water. The hull is completely intact. It's just drifting, caught dead in the ocean currents.
And that eerie silence is what starts to build the psychological tension. I mean, the crew of the Silver Star pulls alongside, they blast their horns, and this massive deafening sound echoes over the water. But there's nothing.
Just total silence.
Right. They hail the ship over the loudspeakers. Silence. Just the sound of the ocean swells slapping against the steel hull of this completely silent ship.
Oh, so the captain of the Silver Star realizes they have no choice but to investigate. They organize a boarding party. And lowering a lifeboat into the open ocean, I mean, even in relatively calm waters, it is physically demanding, really dangerous work.
Oh, absolutely.
You row across this stretch of open water, you're staring up at the sheer steel wall of this silent giant. You grab the ropes, you climb the ladder, your boots hit the deck. And what hits the boarding party first isn't what they see, but what they don't see.
Yeah, because there's no blood on the deck. There are no bullet holes in the bulkheads. There are no signs of a mutiny, like no overturned barrels or broken glass indicating a struggle. It's perfectly ordered.
But the ship is absolutely littered with corpses. The boarding party finds exactly what the radio operator promised. Every single person on board is dead.
It's just staggering.
It is. Even the ship's dog, this large canine, is found dead on the deck, and its lips are curled back, its face is contorted in this silent snarl.
And the physiological descriptions of these bodies from the boarding party reports, it's the kind of thing that burns into your brain and just stays there. Because the bodies are sprawling on their backs, scattered across the decks, in the chart room, on the bridge. But their faces defy all logic.
Yeah, the faces are what really make this a horror story.
Right. The faces of the crew are frozen in sheer, unadulterated terror. Their heads are upturned to the sun. Their mouths are gaping wide open as if caught mid-scream, and their eyes are bulging, staring straight ahead at nothing.
And here's the terrifying forensic reality of that scene. There are zero visible signs of physical injury. None.
Nothing at all.
No gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, no blunt force trauma to the skulls. I mean, they hadn't been bludgeoned by pirates, they hadn't starved to death, and they hadn't succumbed to like a violent disease that leaves physical markers. They are entirely intact.
It's literally like walking into a perfectly sealed haunted house, where the locks on the doors are completely unbroken, the windows are shut tight from the inside, but everyone in the living room is dead. I mean, put yourself in the mind of that boarding party for a second.
It must have been paralyzing.
Right. These are experienced sailors. Some of them likely saw horrific combat in the Pacific theater of World War II just a few years prior to this. They know what a torpedo does to a human body. They know what shrapnel looks like. So to walk onto a sunlit deck, find absolutely no blood, but find undeniable physical proof that dozens of hardened men were essentially frightened to death by something invisible.
It violently strips away the comforting logic that we use to protect our own sanity. You know, like if you find a wrecked ship, you blame the reef or the storm. If you find a murdered crew, you blame human violence. Because you can fight pirates, you can steer away from reefs.
Yeah, those are tangible threats.
Exactly. But when you find a crew perfectly intact, frozen in the act of screaming at the empty sky, your mind immediately goes to the supernatural or the profoundly toxic. The boarding party is standing on this steel island where an invisible killer just wiped out the entire population and left no fingerprints.
I mean, the instinct to just run must have been overwhelming. But maritime law and, basic human decency dictate that they can't just leave a ghost ship drifting in international shipping lanes.
No, they have to do something.
Right. They need to get the Ourang Medan back to a port. They need naval intelligence. They need autopsies. They need to figure out what cargo is sitting in that hold.
So the captain of the Silver Star gives the order to attach tow lines, and this is incredibly laborious work. They have to haul these massive, heavy steel cables across the water between the two ships, secure them to the massive iron bits on the deck of the Ourang Medan, and prepare for a really slow, agonizing drag back to civilization.
But the moment they begin this heavy physical labor, the narrative violently shifts. It goes from this slow burn, psychological horror to a sudden, catastrophic survival situation. Because while they are securing those massive steel tow lines, smoke begins billowing out from below decks.
Yeah, specifically, this thick, acrid smoke starts pouring from the ship's number 4 cargo hold, and the environment deep inside a mid-century merchant vessel's cargo hold is already, a dark, cavernous, metallic space. Now it's acting as a chimney for a rapidly accelerating fire.
Think about the claustrophobia of that exact second. You are inside a steel hull. You are surrounded by corpses staring at you with open mouths. Whatever killed them might still be in the air, and now thick black smoke is pouring up from the lower decks, filling the narrow corridors, choking out the light.
The panic would be instant.
Yeah, the boarding party realizes instantly that the ship is lost, so they abandon the tow lines. They abandon the investigation. It is just a hasty, desperate, chaotic scramble back down the ladders. They leap into their lifeboats and literally row for their lives back toward the safety of the Silver Star.
And thank God they did, because they managed to sever the tow lines just in time. The Ourang Medan doesn't just burn down to the waterline, it violently explodes.
Wow.
The sheer kinetic force of the blast tears the heavy steel freighter apart from the inside out. The hull is compromised instantly, water floods the lower compartments, and the ship rapidly sinks into the dark depths of the Malacca Strait.
The timing of that explosion, if a ship explodes from the very bottom up, originating in the deepest cargo holds, that tells us something catastrophic was hiding down there. The fire was just the fuse. But the convenience of that explosion is staggering. The ocean is basically the ultimate erasure of evidence.
The ocean sanitizes everything. Because the ship is now sitting at the bottom of a deep marine trench, there are no bodies for a coroner to examine. There are no tissue samples to test for toxins. There are no physical cargo manifests to pull from the captain's desk to see, who chartered the vessel. There's absolutely no physical proof of what caused those terrifying facial expressions.
So the physical crime scene is just gone. The steel and the bone are in the abyss. The only way we can solve this mystery or even prove that the Ourang Medan existed outside of sailors' mythology is to hunt down the echoes it left behind. We have to look at alternate timelines, scattered maritime reports, and survivor tales that actually made it to shore.
And to do that, we actually have to jump backward in time. Because while the 1948 incident in the Straits of Malacca is the most famous version of the Ourang Medan story, it is absolutely not the first.
Oh, really?
No. If you dig into the archival source material, the story shifts geographically and temporally. The earliest recorded report actually dates back to 1940.
1940. Okay, so that places us right at the escalation of World War II.
Yes, and the location in this 1940 iteration isn't anywhere near the Straits of Malacca. Reports place the doomed ship deep in the Pacific Ocean, specifically south of the Solomon Islands.
That's a massive geographic shift.
Yeah.
And the distress call in this 1940 version is drastically different too. It's not the poetic, terrifying, "we float, I die." The 1940 S.O.S. is much more clinical, much more detailed, but honestly just as desperate.
What did it say?
It reads, quote, "Big ships with shortwave wireless get touch doctor. Urgent. Probable second officer dead. Other members crew also killed. Disregard medical consultation. S.O.S. urgent assistance warship. Crew as..." And then it abruptly cuts out.
Wow. Disregard medical consultation. S.O.S. urgent assistance warship. That pivot right in the middle of a transmission is incredibly telling, because the radio operator starts by asking for a doctor, right? Looking for medical advice. Then in real time, they realize the doctor can't help them anymore.
Yeah, they realize it's beyond that.
Right. Whatever is happening to the crew is beyond medicine. They need a heavily armed naval vessel. They realize they are under attack.
And according to the 1940 accounts, rescue ships actually did find the vessel. It was listing heavily in the water. They boarded it, located multiple dead crew members frozen at their posts, and as they ventured deeper into the ship's corridors, they heard the deep, concussive sounds of explosions originating from the lower decks.
So, similar to the 48 story.
Exactly. The rescuers fled, abandoned the ship, and watched it catch fire and sink beneath the waves of the Pacific.
The structural parallels are identical. You have an SOS, a boarding party, dead crew with no visible wounds, a sudden fire, a catastrophic explosion, and the ship sinking to hide the evidence. But the 1940 version introduces a massive, complicated wild card into the narrative. It introduces the story of a sole survivor.
Right. An unnamed German crewman purportedly survived this whole ordeal. The story claims he escaped the dying ship, got into the water, and managed to survive long enough to wash ashore on the remote Tongi Atoll.
And Tongi Atoll is an uninhabited coral reef located in the Marshall Islands.
Okay, stop right there. Because if you look at a map of the Pacific Ocean for just 1 second, you are telling me a half-dead, dehydrated, terrified sailor escaped a sinking ship south of the Solomon Islands and somehow navigated the currents to wash ashore on an atoll in the Marshall Islands.
It's a bit of a stretch.
It's a staggering distance. That is thousands of miles of open, punishing ocean. A human being simply cannot swim or drift that distance without dying of exposure, thirst, or predation. That is not a survivor story. That is geographical fiction.
The physical logistics are entirely impossible, I agree. But it highlights a fascinating aspect of maritime lore isolation, and the sheer vastness of the Pacific create a breeding ground for distorted reality. The ocean is so impossibly huge that distances warp in the retelling of rumors. A ship sinking 50 miles off the coast becomes a ship sinking in the Mariana Trench by the time the story reaches a pub in London.
That makes sense. The telephone game, basically.
Exactly. But even if the physical journey of this German survivor is a complete fabrication, the story continues, because he is allegedly found on the shores of this atoll by an Italian missionary and local natives.
And before he perishes from exposure, he gives a deathbed confession to the missionary.
Right. He claims the ship was sailing from a small, unnamed Chinese port destined for Costa Rica. And crucially, he admits the ship was deliberately sailing off the standard shipping lanes to dodge maritime authorities.
And why are you dodging authorities in 1940? You're smuggling. He gives the Italian missionary a final, vital hint about the cargo. He claimed the ship was carrying a badly stowed payload of oil of vitriol. Most of the crew perished, he said, because poisonous fumes began violently escaping from broken containers below decks.
And oil of vitriol is an antiquated historical term for sulfuric acid, which is highly corrosive and incredibly dangerous to transport.
That phrase, oil of vitriol, shifts our entire investigation. We move out of the realm of ghost stories and into a forensic, scientific autopsy of a ghost ship. Because if we accept the premise that a chemical agent was responsible, we have to look at what could scientifically cause an entire crew to die without a mark, contort their faces into masks of terror, and then trigger a massive explosion.
So let's break down the hypotheses, starting with the smuggling theory proposed by historical researcher Roy Bainton.
Yeah, let's get into the chemistry.
So Roy Bain spent years looking into the geopolitical climate of post-war shipping, and the oceans were chaotic. You had surplus military vessels, black market trading, and just a lot of desperate people moving dangerous things. Bainton's hypothesis is that the Ourang Medan was a smuggling vessel chartered to move highly volatile, unregistered chemical substances. Specifically, he theorizes a lethal cargo combination of potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin.
Okay, let's break down the chemistry of that. Potassium cyanide on its own is a solid, but Bainton suggests the ship's hold was breached by seawater, right?
Correct. The holds of mid-century freighters were notoriously leaky, and storms in the Pacific are brutal. If seawater breaches the wooden crates or metal drums containing potassium cyanide, a horrific chemical reaction occurs. When water hits potassium cyanide, it rapidly releases hydrogen cyanide gas.
Hydrogen cyanide, that is the same chemical compound used in gas chambers. It smells faintly of bitter almonds, but by the time you actually smell it, you are already dead. What does that gas actually do to the human body? Why would it freeze their faces in a scream?
So hydrogen cyanide acts by binding to the iron in your cells, specifically in the mitochondria. It completely halts cellular respiration. So your lungs are breathing in air, your blood is circulating oxygen, but your cells physically cannot use it.
Oh, wow.
You are suffocating on a cellular level while breathing normally. The brain registers a catastrophic lack of oxygen, triggering sheer, blinding panic. The crew would have begun hyperventilating, gasping for air that did them no good, their muscles spasming as the nervous system collapsed. It is an agonizing, terrifying way to die, and it perfectly aligns with bodies found with gaping mouths and bulging eyes.
They basically choke to death on invisible air. But hydrogen cyanide doesn't explain the ship blowing up. That's where the nitroglycerin comes in.
Right. Nitroglycerin is an incredibly unstable, highly explosive liquid. In the 1940s, safely transporting it required extreme stabilization, often mixing it with absorbent materials to make dynamite. If raw or poorly stabilized nitroglycerin was just sitting in that hold, it wouldn't take much.
Just a bump.
Exactly. As the ship drifted, or as the boarding party from the Silver Star clambered aboard and began violently pulling those massive tow cables, the sheer mechanical shock and shifting of the cargo could have detonated the nitroglycerin.
So a microscopic leak of water creates the gas that kills the crew. And a slight jolt of the hull detonates the explosive that sinks the evidence. It's like driving a rusted truck full of unpinned grenades and toxic waste over a cobblestone road in the dark. One wrong bump and total erasure.
It's a perfect storm.
But there is another theory, one that moves away from black market smugglers and points a finger directly at international military cover-ups.
Yes. The second major hypothesis involves a chemical weapon known as Tabun. Tabun is a profoundly deadly nerve agent. It was originally developed in Germany in the 1930s by a scientist named Gerhard Schrader, who was actually just trying to create a stronger pesticide.
And he accidentally created one of the most lethal synthetic chemicals on Earth.
Exactly. During World War II, the Japanese military had been storing massive stockpiles of these experimental nerve gases in China.
And at the end of the war, when the Japanese surrendered, those stockpiles didn't just evaporate. The victorious Allied forces, particularly the U.S. military, took control of them. But moving thousands of tons of captured nerve gas across the ocean is a logistical and diplomatic nightmare. You can't just load it onto a registered U.S. Navy destroyer.
No, absolutely not. If a registered U.S. ship sinks with a cargo hold full of Tabun, the international fallout would be catastrophic. So the theory suggests that the military required complete deniability. The Tabun was secretly loaded onto an unregistered, anonymous, dilapidated merchant ship, the Ourang Medan, for covert transport back to the U.S., or perhaps for deep-sea dumping at a remote Pacific outpost.
Let's talk about the biology of Tabun for a second. If a drum of Tabun cracked in the hold of the Ourang Medan, how does it kill?
Tabun is a cholinesterase inhibitor. In your nervous system, a chemical called acetylcholine acts as the messenger that tells your muscles to contract. Once the muscle contracts, an enzyme called cholinesterase comes in to wipe away the messenger, allowing the muscle to relax. Tabun destroys that enzyme.
So the muscles get the signal to contract, but they never get the signal to relax.
Precisely. The moment the crew inhaled the Tabun vapor, their entire nervous system would have short-circuited. Every muscle in their body would violently contract and lock up. The diaphragm seizes, making breathing impossible. The facial muscles pull back into rigid, horrific grimaces. The eyes bulge. Death occurs via asphyxiation and total loss of bodily control within minutes.
That's horrifying.
It is. And again, the physiological mechanism perfectly matches the gruesome visual descriptions from the boarding party.
And as for the fire, nerve agents are often stored or transported alongside incendiary materials or highly flammable solvents. So a chemical leak, a spark from a failing boiler, and the entire ship becomes an incinerator. But wait, author Vincent Gaddis proposed a third scientific theory that requires no exotic nerve gas or international smuggling.
Right. Gaddis looked at the condition of mid-20th century tramp freighters. They were often poorly maintained, rusting buckets. He suggests that an undetected smoldering fire broke out in the ship's massive coal bunkers, or there was a severe malfunction in the ship's boiler system.
A boiler malfunction pumping carbon monoxide directly into the ship's ventilation. And carbon monoxide is entirely odorless. It's colorless. You can't see it, taste it, or smell it.
And it acts incredibly fast. Carbon monoxide binds to the hemoglobin in your blood with an affinity 200 times stronger than oxygen. It literally kicks oxygen out of your bloodstream. The crew would have felt a dull headache, severe lethargy, maybe some confusion. Then they would simply slip into unconsciousness and suffer fatal cardiac or respiratory arrest.
I have to challenge the carbon monoxide theory, though. If a boiler is malfunctioning that severely, wouldn't the engineers in the engine room die first? And if it's a smoldering bunker fire, wouldn't they smell the smoke of the coal long before the odorless carbon monoxide reached lethal levels on the open-air bridge of the ship?
That is the primary flaw in the carbon monoxide hypothesis, yeah. CO poisoning in an enclosed space, like a sealed garage with a running car engine, is highly lethal. But the Ourang Medan crew were found dead on the open deck staring up at the sun.
Right.
For carbon monoxide to reach lethal concentrations in the open ocean breeze, the ship would have to be belching massive, visible clouds of black smoke, which the Silver Star boarding party specifically noted was absent when they arrived.
But the terror of the invisible killer remains. You are in the middle of the dark ocean. You realize the man next to you on watch has just collapsed. You look around for the threat, you scan the horizon for a submarine, you check the deck for an intruder, and there is no enemy, just the air itself turning against you. All three of these theories, the cyanide reaction, the Tabun nerve gas, and the boiler leak, are scientifically plausible mechanisms for a mass casualty event with no trauma.
But here's where we hit the most immovable wall in this entire investigation. For any of the chemistry to matter, for the nerve gas or the cyanide to be the culprit, we have to establish one fundamental foundational truth.
We have to prove the ship actually existed.
Yes. We have to step out of the realm of forensic chemistry and into the realm of investigative journalism and historical paper trails. Who first told this story to the world? We need to find the architect of the nightmare.
The originator of the Ourang Medan narrative, the absolute ground zero for this legend, seems to be a man named Silvio Sherley.
Right. Silvio Shirley was an Italian maritime radio operator and a freelance journalist based in the coastal city of Trieste, Italy. In October of 1940, Shirley published the very first iteration of the Ourang Medan story in the local Trieste newspaper Il Piccolo.
Ah, okay.
He wrote it as part of a recurring dramatic serial he called I drammi del mare, which translates to Dramas of the Sea.
So it literally starts as a dramatic column in a local Italian paper. But it doesn't stay there. A month later, in November 1940, the story leaps across the continent and lands in the British press. The Daily Mirror and the Yorkshire Evening Post both run these terrifying stories on the incident. They cite their source as the Associated Press, reporting out of Trieste, but they attribute the actual tale to an unnamed merchant marine officer.
This is a textbook example of an information cascade. A local writer publishes a sensational story, a larger wire service picks it up, stripping away the context of the dramatic serial column. And then British newspapers, desperate for gripping copy during the dark early days of World War II, print it as fact.
It's all about context.
Yeah, you have to remember the psychological state of the world in 1940. The oceans are legitimately terrifying places. The Atlantic is swarming with U-boats. Naval mines are tearing ships apart. Convoys are sinking in the freezing dark. A story about a mysterious ship where an entire crew drops dead without a shot fired taps directly into the prevailing maritime paranoia of the era.
And then the story goes dormant during the worst years of the war. But then it experiences a massive, highly detailed revival in 1948. A Dutch-Indonesian newspaper operating out of Semarang called Die Locomotief publishes a sweeping, highly publicized three-part series on the Ourang Medan. They go all out. They even managed to duplicate illustrations and photographs from Shirley's original 1940 Il Piccolo article.
This 1948 Dutch publication is the critical juncture. This is the exact moment the lore we know today is solidified. This is the paper that introduces the altered S.O.S. message, I die, and the story of the surviving German sailor giving a deathbed confession about sulfuric acid to an Italian missionary.
And who is the source providing all these newly discovered details to the Dutch newspaper?
Silvio Shirley of Trieste.
It all routes back to one man. But the editors at Die Locomotief must have smelled something fishy, because they did something incredible at the end of their three-part series. They printed a massive journalistic disclaimer.
It's a fascinating piece of legal and reputational cover. The disclaimer reads, quote, "This is the last part of our story about the mystery of the Ourang Medan. We must repeat that we don't have any other data on this mystery of the sea, nor can we answer the many unanswered questions in the story. It may seem obvious that the entire story is a fantasy, a thrilling romance of the sea. On the other hand, the author, Silvio Shirley, assures us of the authenticity of the story."
It's the ultimate hand wash. They print a sensational, terrifying ghost story that undoubtedly sold thousands of papers, but they explicitly push the entire burden of historical proof onto a freelance writer in Italy. If it's a lie, it's Shirley's lie.
Exactly.
But Shirley's story didn't stay confined to the realm of sensationalist newspapers. This is the part of the timeline that truly stuns me and gives the Ourang Medan a veneer of terrifying legitimacy. In May of 1952, the United States Coast Guard shockingly published the story of the Ourang Medan in their official publication, The Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council.
A verified official branch of the United States military printed the story of a ghost ship whose crew was frightened to death. It is a massive turning point in the credibility of the lore.
But why? Why on earth would the U.S. Coast Guard risk their institutional credibility by publishing what the Dutch press already admitted might be a pulp fiction romance of the sea? Is this the Coast Guard's tacit, off-the-books admission that military nerve gas transport or chemical smuggling was a real active threat in the Pacific? Were they using a ghost story to warn sailors about a very real hazard?
It really forces us to examine how institutional knowledge is passed down. Official bodies, especially in the military or maritime trades, sometimes publish cautionary tales not because they have sent investigators to verify every single date and coordinate, but because the lesson embedded in the story is vitally important.
The underlying truth.
Right.
When dedicated researchers, naval historians, and maritime investigators try to lock down the hard empirical facts of the Ourang Medan, they don't just hit a dead end, they hit a brick wall. Several authors, including exhaustive investigators writing for mystery publications like the 14 Times, note a complete, absolute inability to find any mention of the ship in Lloyd's Register of American and Foreign Shipping.
And Lloyd's Register is the Bible of maritime shipping. If a vessel is built, insured, and sailing international waters, it is in Lloyd's Register. The Ourang Medan is not. Furthermore, There are no registration records for a ship by that name located in the Netherlands, in Indonesia, or anywhere else in the maritime archives.
And it gets worse. Author Roy Bainton, the man who proposed the cyanide and nitroglycerin theory, actually tracked down the records of the rescue ship. He confirmed that the Silver Star was a real American vessel operating in the Pacific during that time frame. But when he pulled the official naval logbooks for the Silver Star,
Total silence. The logbooks for the Silver Star show absolutely no record of any rescue attempt in the Straits of Malacca. There is no entry about receiving a frantic SOS. There is no log of lowering a boarding party. There is no mention of discovering a deck full of corpses, and there is no record of severing tow lines to escape a massive explosion.
I mean, a captain doesn't just forget to log that a merchant ship blew up off his port bow. This complete lack of hard data has led many modern researchers to conclude that the dates, the locations, the names of the ships, and the circumstances were either highly exaggerated from a much smaller incident, or that Silvio Shirley simply fabricated the entire nightmare from whole cloth to sell newspapers in 1940.
But let me present the perpetual loophole of the conspiracy theorist. If you are operating a ship specifically designed to be off the books for illegal, highly lethal smuggling, whether it's raw cyanide for a criminal syndicate or Tabun nerve gas for a shadow branch of the military, wouldn't a complete lack of registration be exactly what you would expect to find?
Oh, absolutely. You don't register a ghost ship if you're trying to hide what's bleeding out of its cargo hold.
Yeah.
You buy a scrapped hull, you paint a fake name like Ourang Medan on the side, and you sail strictly in the shadows. The absence of evidence becomes the proof of the cover-up.
It's a compelling narrative trap. But if we pull back and look at the Ourang Medan through the wider lens of maritime folklore, we see how it perfectly mirrors other legendary tales of the sea.
Like the enduring mythos surrounding the RMS Titanic.
Exactly. The Titanic was a very real documented tragedy, but the moment it sank, it instantly transitioned into a legend. It became a story that blended human hubris, technological arrogance, and the punishing, indifferent power of nature. Human beings are deeply psychologically drawn to ghost ship narratives.
It's the ultimate fear of the unknown.
Think about it. The ocean is one of the very last true frontiers on Earth, where humans are entirely, utterly vulnerable. You can build a ship with millions of tons of steel, you can equip it with radar and shortwave radio, but the moment you lose sight of land, you are entirely at the mercy of the elements.
A missing ship, a crew found dead with staring eyes, a radio transmission that simply says, "I die." It represents the ultimate loss of human control. It violently strips away our illusion of mastery over the planet. So we've traveled from a crackling Morse code SOS in the sweltering heat of the Malacca Strait to the visceral horror of a boarding party finding a ship full of frozen faces.
Right.
We've dug into the gruesome biology of Tabun nerve gas and the suffocating chemistry of hydrogen cyanide. And we've chased a paper trail from an Italian newspaper column all the way to the official dockets of the U.S. Coast Guard, only to find missing logbooks and erased registries.
It's quite the journey.
What does it all leave us with? It leaves us with the terrifying, unrelenting power of the ocean. It leaves us with a devastating potential of human hubris, whether that's a military playing fast and loose with experimental nerve gas, or a smuggler loading unstable explosives into a leaky wooden hold. And most of all, it leaves us with the incredible fragility of the human mind when faced with total isolation.
And that brings us to a final, truly haunting thought to carry with us. We spend so much time analyzing the archives, debating whether Silvio Shirley invented the Ourang Medan for a quick paycheck, or whether the U.S. Coast Guard subtly acknowledged a covert chemical spill. But what if the real horror of the SS Ourang Medan isn't whether the story is entirely empirical fact or entirely pulp fiction?
What is the real horror, then?
The true terror is that the ocean is so incredibly vast, so relentlessly deep, and so completely indifferent to human life that a rusted freighter full of terrified, dying sailors could vanish from the face of the earth tomorrow and we would never even know it happened.
The ultimate silent deep. We like to think of our modern world as mapped, categorized, tracked by GPS, and illuminated. But out there, in the sweltering, heavy air of the Straits of Malacca, or the freezing, crushing depths of the Pacific, the landscape is dark. Sometimes the only thing that comes back out of that darkness is a garbled message on the wire, a scream frozen in time, and a mystery that simply refuses to die.